Now to how the pandemic is affecting the U.S. military. As of this morning, the Pentagon says it has more than 3,000 positive cases across the services. That includes more than 150 sailors on an American aircraft carrier currently docked in Guam. That created its own story. Nick Schifrin has more.
Judy, it has been a tough week for the Navy. First, the captain of the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt wrote a remarkable memo requesting that he evacuate 90% of his sailors because of an outbreak of COVID-19. In response, acting Navy Secretary Thomas Modly relieved him, saying he'd gone around the chain of command. Modly then flew to the Theodore Roosevelt off of Guam and gave a blunt speech, including this statement.
It was my opinion that if he didn't think that information was going to get out into the public in this information age that we live in, then he was A, too naive or too stupid to be the commanding officer of a ship like this.
Yesterday, after a lot of criticism, Modly resigned. To talk about this, I'm joined by Admiral Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the George W. Bush and Obama administrations. Admiral, thank you very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. How do you think the Navy has handled this situation?
Well, as you said, Nick, it's been a tough week. And it was very clear that the Navy couldn't get out in front of this early enough before the acting secretary, Modly, grabbed it and obviously made up his mind to relieve the CO. And there were an awful lot of issues associated with that. All of that said, I didn't think that Captain Crozier's conduct rose to the level or even close to the level where he should have been relieved.
What Modly told us, told the media last week, and what others have echoed, is that Captain Crozier went out of the chain of command. He sent this memo electronically, didn't even CC his commanding officer who was down the hall, literally, from him at the time. Is that criticism legitimate?
Well, I think that certainly Captain Crozier did not handle all of it exceptionally well. And it is indeed strange that he appeared to not have much of a relationship with his immediate boss, who was embarked on the ship with him. That said, I think what Captain Crozier was trying to do was what all CEOs try to do: take care of their people and watch out for their health and welfare. And obviously in the middle of a crisis, and it was an exponential crisis. I think Crozier's letter actually was literally a cry for help and moving as rapidly as possible because he was afraid some of his young sailors were going to die. He didn't do it smoothly, but at the same time, it didn't meet the standard, I think, where he should have been relieved.
We've talked about how Secretary Modly did have to go, in your opinion. Do you think that he had to go because of the fact that he fired Captain Crozier, or because of the language he used on the Theodore Roosevelt?
I thought I listened to his speech on the Theodore Roosevelt. I've literally never heard any senior civilian or senior officer talk like that to the crew. And from my perspective, when he walked off that ship, that was a time for him to walk out of the Navy. There just wasn't any question about it. He didn't have any credibility left with the troops. He didn't have any credibility left, apparently, with the administration. And so he really, for the good of the Navy, he needed to move on, which is what he did.
Let's broaden the discussion to the overall response to COVID-19. We've now seen thousands of members of the military come back with positive responses. I've spoken to some people who criticize Secretary Esper for a couple of things. One, not responding quickly enough, but also deputizing some of these decisions to lower level commanders, allowing lower level commanders to decide how to respond to COVID-19. Is that a legitimate criticism? How do you think the Pentagon has done overall in response to COVID-19?
Well, I think the challenge for the Pentagon has not been unlike the country's. How do you get ahead of this, particularly when it's moving so quickly and you don't have the kind of testing capability, if you will, to find out how serious it really is? There's part of the armed forces I know in South Korea that has done exceptionally well on this, because it appears as though General Abrams moved, as the South Koreans moved, very, very rapidly. And decisions like this are always fraught with how much do you control and how much do you let your commanders take care of. By and large, the military at the commander level, and that's really the flag and general officer level, should have a pretty good handle on how to handle this. and then they delegate it down, or they give direction down the chain of command to handle it well. There certainly is some evidence that it's not well understood on the waterfront, that there are differences in how it's being handled on the waterfront. And I think that needs to be solidified, not just in the Navy, but throughout the services.
And going forward, do you fear the Navy is ready to handle a pandemic, to handle this kind of medical challenge as it's trying to handle the challenge that China poses?
Yeah, I think the Navy is ready to do that, and actually has been handling it for weeks. And needs to obviously have the right focus, make sure that the measures that are taken are minimizing the risk to the troops, and putting the troops in a position where they're a priority, and at the same time aware of the mission, specifically out in the Western Pacific with respect to China. And leaders need to focus hard on getting it right.
Admiral, you just said it's a challenge for all leaders. I have to ask, how do you think President Trump has responded to this crisis?
I think it's pretty well a consensus that we haven't acted very quickly. The administration hasn't acted very quickly. And from a leadership standpoint, when you're in a crisis, there's nobody more critical than a leader at every single level of government or the chain of command or in any organization. And I think it's really important that what the president says, how he says it, in addition to what he does. Leaders need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And I think that's really critical for the country and actually for the world.
And it sounds like you're criticizing the president. It sounds like you're suggesting that he hasn't done that.
Well, I'll let you deduce what you want to from that comment.
Admiral Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, thank you very much.